And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on Thursday, August 21st, 2025. And starting with the state of the sea ice in the far north, there's still a little bit of ice along the Beaufort Sea coastline, but the bulk of pack ice is well offshore. And we're at that point, late summer melt off. We're almost to the month of September, and typically, climatologically speaking, we reach minimum ice just prior to the equinox around the third week of September. But a lot of open water, especially the Chukchi along the Chukchi coast from Utqiagvik all the way to the Bering Strait. On the satellite image this Thursday mid-afternoon, we have a low in the North Pacific, an occluded front around it that's beginning to wind down, but there's going to be a band of some clouds and rain and breezier conditions brush especially the outer coast here of the Panhandle as we go through Friday afternoon and into the evening. Meanwhile, some ridging where there is some sunshine, pretty nice weather along some coastal areas. But as we look further to the west, there's an area of low pressure working its way up across the western Bering. This will cross the Gulf of Anadyr into the Bering Strait Friday night and early Saturday morning, and a warm front pushing up into the west coast, and then eventually in the interior has breezy conditions and a lot of moisture. It's warm, moist air, so that's going to lead to some moderate to locally heavy rain at times. Taking a look at the low pressure here for Friday afternoon south of the Gulf, this bringing a little band of rain will swing across the Panhandle, especially there in the afternoon. And then as we look to the west, this is the pretty potent system that's going to be slamming into the west coast later Friday, and especially Friday night, Saturday morning, and that moisture will transport and push inland across the mainland here for the weekend. In fact, some of the heavier rain will fall along the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range through the Yukon River Valley, Seward Peninsula, areas around Norton Sound. We'll see some periods of moderate to locally heavier rain at times. Saturday, we still have that conveyor belt of tropical or Pacific moisture coming in along this frontal boundary and across the Bering and funneling right up into the interior. So it's going to be a very wet weekend across this area as we head through Saturday and Sunday. Looking at the marine forecast for the Panhandle, once we get by some rain Friday, it should be drier and warmer for the rest of the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. Winds northerly, Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, waves 2-3 feet, 10 to 15 knots. Variable winds, waves a foot or two at best around Ketchikan, Dixon Entrance. Southeast winds off of Craig there, 15 knots, but they're going to turn easterly, increase as you go up the coast, especially Sitka through Cross Sound. Outside of that, 25 to 30 knot east winds, waves 7 feet, and then the winds turn north and variable there by the time you get to Cape Suckling. And then for Saturday, winds are going to be north-northwest across the inner channels with waves running just a couple of feet. Outer coast, kind of a mix. Shore parallel northwest winds off of Prince of Wales Island. West wind trying to turn in there toward Port Alexander. Offshore flow Sitka 10 knots. Offshore, or at least out of Cross Sound, northeast wind 15 knots. And then just light variable winds up toward Yakutat and Cape Suckling at just 5 knots. And we'll see those variable winds around 10 knots outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance on Friday off the Kenai Coast, lower Cook Inlet. As we go up middle, upper Cook Inlet, southwest to south winds 15 knots. Waves maybe a couple, 2-3 feet. And then on Saturday, variable winds, Prince William Sound outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance along the coast there of the Kenai. Waves only a couple of feet or so there in Prince William Sound, maybe 3-4 feet outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance. Winds will be generally southerly, upper middle Cook Inlet at 20 knots with 3 to 4 foot waves, and then southwest winds to 15 knots, kind of guided toward Homer and the Spit there on Saturday. And for Friday, winds will be northeast to north 15 to 20 knots, Shelikof Strait to the east side of Kodiak Island, and then just kind of variable winds, light variable winds 10 knots, Bristol Bay, either side of the Alaska Peninsula with waves not more than a couple of feet. On Saturday, those winds are still going to be variable at 10 knots around Kodiak, east side of Kodiak Island and along the Pacific side of the peninsula. But look for southwest winds about 15 knots, Shelikof Strait, Bristol Bay, and down along the Bering side with waves 2 to 3 feet. Across the Aleutians, some variable winds 10 knots south of Nikolsky and Unalaska, but as we get west, the winds pick up from the southwest and south at 25 to 30 knots west of Adak because there is a frontal system, warm front and frontal system off to the north and west, increasing the gradient. It's actually what's transporting all of that moisture across the Bering toward the west coast. Saturday, variable winds 10 knots far eastern Aleutians around Unalaska, becoming southwest and Nikolsky 15 knots, and then southerly 25 to 30 knots Atka through Adak, and then once you get west of Kiska, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. For Friday, just variable winds 10 knots within Bristol Bay, 25 knot south winds though into Kuskokwim Bay with a few foot waves. Strongest winds out towards St. Matthew, 35 knot gales out of the south because we have that warm front and tighter pressure gradient that's going to be pushing in to this area of the west coast. And along the lower Yukon coast, 20-25 knot winds. Southerly there, though, in that wider expanse of Norton Sound, waves 4 or 5 feet along the lower Yukon coast. And then Saturday, that wind is going to be more directed into Norton Sound. So we're looking at, for the lower areas here, south-southwest winds 15 to 20 knots, Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay. Pribilov's 20 knot southwest winds with 6 to 8 foot waves, 25 knot southwest winds, 14 foot waves around St. Matthew. And then look for those 20-25 knot southwesterly winds along the lower Yukon coast north of Makoriak and running into Norton Sound with waves running 5 to as high as 8 feet. And then before the Bering Strait, north side of St. Lawrence and west side of the Seward Peninsula Friday, south winds 15 to 20 knots, waves 3-4 feet coming up through the lower Chukchi Sea. Generally a southerly component, 10 to 15 knots, waves 2-3 feet, turning more southwesterly as you get past Point Ley to Utqiagvik, continuing to Prudhoe Bay and then turning northwest 10 knots with a couple of foot waves there around Kaktovik. And then on Saturday, winds will be southeast to east 15 knots along the Beaufort Sea coast, dropping down along the Chukchi Sea coast. West of Wainwright, northeast wind 20 knots, turning northerly around Cape Lisburne and Point Hope, and then running into a south-southwest wind increasing 25 knots through the Bering Strait, north side of St. Lawrence, waves 7 to 9 feet, locally even as high as 10-11 feet there over toward Gambell on Saturday.